Even though these advocates who are pushing for these things will say this anti-trans bill will result in more people killing themselves, there are organizations like the Trevor Project, which is an evil, disgusting organization that promotes grooming. They actually have a service on their website, for example, that they've advertised to minors, which allows you to hit escape 3 times and completely clear your browser history so that your parents don't see that you were chatting with them or what you're chatting about. So I just want to put that as an aside. But the Trevor Project, a number of these other LGBTQ coalitions actually signed on to a letter, a formal letter saying, you need to stop saying that these laws are going to result in more LGBTQ people killing themselves, because what happens is when someone commits suicide, those around them who start to identify with their reason for committing suicide more become more likely to kill themselves. So the irony is, even these LGBTQ organizations, which I despise, even they have acknowledged in published literature saying you need to stop saying that not giving these interventions or passing legislation that restricts them will result in people killing themselves, because that's going to result in more people killing themselves. Now, the thing is, these letters are not touted by activists. And even though they've said this, on the one hand, it's, in my estimation, done with kind of a wink and a nudge, because all of them are still willing to allow the same kind of rhetoric to flourish as soon as it's politically advantageous, even though they themselves have acknowledged, and when I say they themselves, not they themselves, sorry, they themselves have acknowledged that this rhetoric is actually going to do more to cause people to consider suicide or commit suicide than these laws will.
Yeah, I mean, there's a well-known sad reality that suicide has a social contagion aspect.
Yeah.
And I think what we're also discovering is so too does transgender identification and non-binary identification. There's a social contagion aspect to both. Trevor Project is willing to, as you report, own up to the fact that if you keep talking about suicide, more and more people are actually going to commit it. I should also add, there is zero evidence that any of these state laws that prohibit, harm to minors, under the guise of medical care, actually have increased any suicides whatsoever. There's no evidence for that proposition. But claiming they do as a form of emotional blackmail for voters and for legislators could have the unintended consequence of actually leading some people to commit suicide. And so, if Trevor Project's calling that out, good for them. What they don't want to acknowledge is the social contagion aspect to the transgender and gender non-binary identification. Right. And I don't even think it's gender dysphoria per se. I mean, I think 5-10 years ago, it was probably more common that a young person had, what was then known as gender identity disorder. Then, the DSM-5 redefined it as gender dysphoria. Now, I just think you actually have clusters of friend groups at high school and collegiate levels that just come out as non-binary or as trans, not with any actual like deep-seated psychological gender dysphoria, but more as almost like an identity, almost like a field. You talk to some of the people who have gone through with it. You talk to some of the parents. There seems to almost be part of our victimology society that if you are a vanilla, straight, white, middle class girl from the suburbs, you're kind of at the bottom of the victimology totem pole. If you come out as non-binary, you now kind of have a shield of invincibility in which no one can really attack you, criticize you, pick on you, et cetera, et cetera. And so it seems, again, this is anecdotal. We don't have data on any of this stuff, but it seems like that's a rising phenomenon. And then the flip side of what you said about the parents who are heavily invested in this, it can also, for some of the children, some of the teenagers, some of the young 20-somethings, make it very hard to walk away from. Because once you've now built up your identity as, wait, I'm not just a plain vanilla, ordinary white middle-class girl from the suburbs who's straight. I'm unique, I'm trans, or I'm non-binary. It's hard to say it was a phase, it was a stage, I was making it, but whatever your story would be, to walk it back.
Yeah, exactly. So because we have been sold this bizarre idea that these identifiers couldn't possibly be contagious in any way, and anyone who identifies it with any moment identifies with it immutably, it couldn't possibly be a phase. How dare you assume that that might be the case? Even though the president of WPATH, by the way, has acknowledged that social contagion is a reality. This is just something that you're not allowed to say.